Today, we're diving into one of the most wild, chaotic, and frankly, defining periods in European history, Spain in the 19th century. This wasn't just a time of change. No, this was a century-long violent clash between two massive ideas. The old world of absolute kings and tradition fighting tooth and nail against a new world of constitutions, rights, and revolution. It's a battle that would literally forge the Spain we see today. Okay, so let's just start with the central question, because it's a big one. How on earth does a country survive this? I mean, just think about those numbers for a second. 7 different constitutions, 3 full-blown civil wars, 5 entirely different systems of government, all in the span of 100 years. That's not just instability. It's a nation in a constant state of political whiplash. So, to wrap our heads around this chaos, we're going to follow the story like a giant pendulum. First, we'll see the massive external shock that broke everything. Then, the swing towards a liberal dream, followed by a violent snap back to the old ways. We'll get into the chaos in the middle, a truly radical experiment. And finally, the desperate search for some kind of peace, even if it was an uneasy one. So, where does a story like this even begin? Well, funnily enough, it doesn't start in Spain. It starts with one man's colossal ambition to conquer all of Europe, Napoleon Bonaparte. This is the moment, the spark, that shatters the old Spanish order for good. It all started with a classic bait and switch. Napoleon asks Spain, "Hey, can my troops just pass through to get to Portugal?" Spain agrees. But of course, once his armies were inside the country, the mask came off. They weren't just passing through, they seized the capital, Madrid, and in a brilliant political trap, he lured the Spanish king and his heir to France and basically took them hostage. And if that wasn't enough, Napoleon then just hands the Spanish throne to his own brother, José Bonaparte. I mean, the arrogance is just stunning. For the Spanish people, this wasn't just a new king. It was a foreign invader sitting on their throne. The reaction was immediate, and it was furious. On May 2nd, 1808, the people of Madrid rose up, and that single act lit the fuse for a brutal 6-year war for independence. And this really gives you a bird's-eye view of the century's roller coaster ride. War, then a taste of liberalism, a hard swing back to absolute monarchy, civil war, a republic, and then back to a monarchy all over again. Yeah, buckle up, this is the chaotic path we're about to walk. Now, something amazing happened amidst all the chaos of war. With the king gone and the country fighting for its very survival, a new group of thinkers saw this incredible opportunity to rebuild Spain from the ground up. This was the first great swing of that pendulum towards a modern, liberal nation. And this right here is the fundamental fight of the entire century, boiled down to 2 opposing ideas. On one side, you've got the old world, absolute monarchy, the idea that the king's power comes directly from God and his word is literally the law. But on the other side, you've got this radical new idea, liberalism, which says, no, power comes from the people, from the nation, and everyone, including the king, has to follow the law. And that new idea took form in this incredible document. And I find this part so fascinating. While most of Spain was a war zone, a group of representatives huddled together in the besieged city of Cádiz and wrote one of the most progressive constitutions of its time. They called it La Pipa, and it was revolutionary. It declared that sovereignty, the right to rule, belonged to the nation, not the king. It was a beacon of hope for a totally new kind of Spain. But just as quickly as that liberal dream appeared, it was completely snuffed out. That pendulum was about to swing back, and it was going to swing back hard, pushed by the one person the liberals had been fighting for all along. So, the French are finally defeated in 1814. King Ferdinand VII is freed, and he returns to Spain. The liberals who wrote that amazing constitution in his name are thrilled. They're ready to welcome him home as Spain's first constitutional monarch. They were about to be very, very wrong. And there you have it, in the king's own words. He didn't just reject the constitution, he declared it null and void, as if it had never even existed. He immediately had the liberal leaders arrested, brought back the Inquisition, and systematically erased every single reform. The dream was over. Absolute monarchy was back with a vengeance. Well, the king's betrayal didn't actually solve anything. In fact, it did the opposite. It basically locked Spain into decades of bitter division and brutal conflict. The pendulum was now stuck, swinging wildly back and forth in a state of near constant chaos.
This whole messy period is really defined by three things. First, you have the Carlist Wars. These were savage civil wars fought over who should be on the throne, but they were really about the soul of Spain. Modern city liberalism versus old-school rural tradition. Second, you have the absolutely disastrous reign of Queen Isabel II, which was just a blur of political instability and military coups, or pronunciamientos, one after another. And all this fighting at home, it had a devastating price.
And you can really see that price right here. While Spain was busy tearing itself apart, its massive American empire, which it held for 300 years, just slipped away. One by one, nations declared their independence, and a weak, distracted Spain couldn't do a thing to stop it. So after decades of terrible monarchs and civil wars, the country finally had enough and decided to try something completely different. The pendulum didn't just swing back to liberalism, it swung way past it, all the way to a radical Republican experiment. And this is where things get really wild. Right, so the chaos under Queen Isabel finally boils over. In 1868, a military uprising called the Glorious Revolution kicks her out of the country. Then, in this totally bizarre move, they try to import a new king from Italy, Amadeo of Savoy. He lasted all of 2 years before he just quit, famously saying the Spanish people were ungovernable. With no monarch willing to take the job, there was really only one option left. So in 1873, Spain becomes a republic. But if you thought the monarchy was unstable, the republic was pure chaos. I mean, get this, the First Spanish Republic burned through 4 different presidents in just 11 months. It was a total mess, collapsing under the weight of political infighting, regional rebellions, the ongoing Carlist War, and it ended, like so many governments before it, in yet another military coup. Okay, so after that spectacular failure of a republic, the people in charge, the politicians, the military, decided that what Spain needed more than anything else was just order. Any order. The pendulum would be forced back to the center, creating a fragile piece that really just papered over the huge cracks in the nation's foundation. And what was the solution they came up with? Well, bring back the monarchy. The army restored the Bourbon dynasty to the throne, but this time it was Alfonso XII, the son of the queen they'd just kicked out. The goal was simple: just stop the chaos, put an end to the endless cycle of coups and revolutions. So how did they do it? They came up with a very clever system called the Turno Pacifico, or the peaceful turn. Basically, the two big political parties, the conservatives and the liberals, made a deal. They would rig the elections to make sure they just took turns running the government. It was completely undemocratic, a total sham, but it worked. For a while at least, it stopped the coups. But of course, this kind of stability was just an illusion. It was only on the surface. Because underneath it all, the big problems hadn't gone away. All the people left out of this cozy political deal, industrial workers, poor farmers, regional nationalists, they were getting angrier. New movements like the Socialist Party, founded in 1879, were starting to grow, and they were demanding real change. And that brings us to the final, critical question. The century ended in this fragile, artificial peace. But that fundamental conflict, the big fight over who should rule Spain and how, was it really solved? Or was it just simmering below the surface, waiting to erupt? The fight for Spain's soul was far from over. It was really just taking a breath before the even bigger explosions of the 20th century.